Hello everyone! As you might have guessed from the title, in this video I am going to show you some basics that are helpful to know about gouache. Personally, I have been using gouache for a few years now, often in combination with watercolor or just alone on tinted cardboard. And while there are a lot of similarities between gouache and watercolor, in my opinion gouache has some great properties that I want to show you. But first off, what is gouache? It is water-based opaque paint that consists of pigment, water and a binder. It used to contain chalk, which was cheap and responsible for the high opacity and heaviness of the paint. Nowadays some companies use white pigments instead of chalk to achieve a better quality. You could say gouache is a relative of watercolor, as they share a lot of similarities regarding performance and drying time. For example, you can work in thin washes of paint like you would do with watercolor. But in addition, with gouache you can also use thicker layers to profit from the opaque properties that you can't achieve with watercolors. This essential difference allows you to work from dark to light, not just from light to dark. To achieve white with watercolor, you leave the area that is supposed to be light without color to let the paper shine through. With gouache you can paint the white. In that regard, it shares similarities with acrylics and oil paints, but unlike those media, you can always reactivate dry gouache with water again. On one hand, that can be quite helpful. You can correct mistakes and add or lift color. You also don't have to throw away dried color on your palette. On the other hand, it is very easy to smudge and ruin already good results that haven't been fixed with a fixative or something similar. Also keep in mind that the appearance of gouache is different from acrylics and oils, and even watercolor, since gouache dries down very matte and often looks kind of milky. The tools you need for gouache are almost the same as those needed for watercolor. You want to use strong paper, usually 300 grams. To prevent the paper from warping, in case you use a lot of water, it's safer to go with paper that is glued on the sides. Or you can tape the paper down yourself with masking tape. As a little extra to ordinary watercolor paper, you can also use tinted cardboard and canvases that will highlight the opaque properties of your gouache even more. For the brushes I usually go with synthetic brushes that I also like to use for my watercolor paintings. There are occasions where natural brushes are helpful, but we will come to that later. You will also need a palette to mix your colors on and of course water. At last, don't forget to have tissues nearby in order to clean your brush or lift off color. Let's get started with painting. As I stated earlier, there are different ways to use this paint. First up, you can use the color very boldly, just like poster paints, by using just a tiny amount of water or no water at all. This is great for hand lettering and very graphic work where you need the full opacity. We can work from dark to light with gouache, but we have to consider that those colors reactivate with water. So when you overpaint the already laid down layers, colors like white will most likely get muddy and stained. So if you want to have brilliant highlights, there are still occasions where you might want to leave out the light parts, so you can paint them afterwards without risking a muddy color. Next we can work with more water and go for a wet and wet approach that watercolor artists among you are probably familiar with. Use a lot of water and dilute your color. This way you can use gouache in a watercolor manner and make the colors bleed into each other. Wet and wet is great for coloring large areas and creating clean gradients and transitions. And when the colors have dried down, you can wet them again to layer or remove color. But watch out, with gouache the color slightly changes after drying. Darker tones tend to get a little bit lighter, while lighter tones can get darker. That is something you need to keep an eye on, especially when you mix your own shades. So let's take a look at some different blending techniques. First up is the wet and wet blending. As we have talked about, gouache can be considered the opaque sibling of watercolor. And we can use the watercolor techniques as well. Wet the surface of your paper and let the colors bleed into one another. With the brush, push the pigments in the desired direction, if you notice some uneven spreading. This technique allows you to blend the colors very softly, but because a lot of water is involved, the colors get diluted and aren't as opaque as they could be, letting the paper shine through. Also, it might be difficult to layer several washes, because with plenty of water in use, there is a high chance that new layers of paint will reactivate those already laid down below. Next up is the flat color technique. To create an opaque gradient, we need to use the colors with less water. The consequence of this is that the colors won't bleed into each other anymore. However, we can create the illusion of a gradient by mixing the shades that lie between the two colors and placing them next to each other. It is a quite simple and efficient technique, and the result of it often reminds me of painting by number pictures or of a paper collage. So take the colors you want to use and mix transition tones. Here I use magenta and a light blue, and together they form a nice purple. There are some occasions where the paper collage look isn't appreciated though, and the key for that is our next technique, the overpaint technique. Here we roughly place our tones where we want them to be. Use a good amount of color, and once everything is set, we use the wet brush and paint over the whole area, dragging and smudging the colors into one another. You can also add more color or different tones at this point. The difficulty that comes with this technique is that you have to work very quickly and precisely, because once the color is dried, it will be very hard to blend them into each other. You can of course use water to reactivate them, but that has the potential to ruin the good results you already have achieved. So I recommend sketching and playing with the colors beforehand to figure out what technique works best for you. A lot of it has to do with intuition, which comes with experience and practice. Now that we have talked about the different techniques, let's put them to work. For this painting I've previously sketched out the face with a B pencil on a piece of cardboard. The softer the lead of your pencil is, the higher is the risk that it smudges with your color, so if you want to be sure if your pencil works, just test it beforehand. Since the paint will cover up the drawing, you can also use a fine liner for your line art. This time I use a natural brush instead of a synthetic one, because it's softer. On my first attempt of this painting I used my usual synthetic brushes, but those scratched the color of the surface. That effect depends a bit on how absorbent your cardboard is, but let me tell you, I didn't have a great time. First I get down the basic light situation of the face, so for this part I use a flat color technique and a bit of overpaint technique. I want to work really opaque to make the painting pop out from the grey cardboard. But for the first layers I use the colors very thinly, so I can cover things up later. After all, it is easier to overpaint thinner layers, because as I said earlier, this color reactivates with water. That means putting down more color in the beginning will just increase the potential for ruining those layers later. I also have to pay attention to how the colors shift in values when they eventually dry down, so in this step I work very carefully. I place down all the basic shapes and shadows with lighter and darker flesh tones, occasionally blending them already. When the rough part is done, I focus on the details, lines and smaller shapes. That includes the eyes and nose, which need a touch-up, so the lines of the underdrawing won't get lost because of the opaque color covering them. After I feel like the groundwork is done, I move on to step 2, which is more or less the overpaint technique. I start with mixing transition tones. Then I slightly place them where I want to blend the colors. That tiny amount of humidity is often enough to reactivate the underlying paint and make them blendable, and the transition tones help to connect the colors. With tiny brush strokes, I merge those areas together. The most difficult part in this step is not only the risk of removing the underlying color, but also mixing the matching transition tone, because again, it can shift in value once it dries down. So I recommend swatching the tones on a separate piece of paper before applying them to your real painting. For the final details of the face I use a pencil, because you can draw precise lines and sharpen the edges like those for the nose, the mouth, eyes and eyebrows. Then I continue with the hair. I start by putting down a flat layer of a light blue with a purple gradient. I actually underestimated the opacity of the paint that covers the line art now, but that also works as a benefit because this first layer came out very clean. I add the details that got lost with the purplish tone and roughly sketch the shadows, blending them with the overpaint technique where it's necessary. As a highlight tone I use a muddy light yellow that I have been using for the skin as well. For the hair on the side I use a dark bluish grey tone that also receives a few details. I paint them with a few lighter shades of that color. To add a little contrast in the end, I use a strong and plain magenta for the clothes. Because this painting is just meant to be a portrait, I don't paint much more than a bit underneath the hoodie. A few brush strokes are enough to prevent the painting from looking like a sticker. For the final details, I go in with the colored pencil and trace some lines and strengthen the shadows. It's also a helpful tool to smooth out gradients, in case you feel there are some parts that could need a touch-up. And here we go, the final result. Admittedly, gouache isn't the easiest medium in my experience. Even while recording this video, I learned something new about this medium, and my first try of this painting was a total mess, because my synthetic brushes were too hard to use together with a piece of cardboard. I had never had a problem with gouache and synthetic brushes before, but still that is something to watch out for. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes in art, design, drawing and painting and many more. A premium membership gives you unlimited access to high quality classes from experts in their fields. For example, I learned several ways of bookbinding through multiple Skillshare classes. If you want to learn something, you will very likely find a class for it on Skillshare. But it also works the other way around. Sometimes you just want to take a peek into a new skill or hobby. Just browse the many classes on the platform and I'm sure you'll find something that piques your interest. It's a valuable resource of courses that can often take you deeper into the topic than many disconnected tutorial videos can. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month, and if you're among the first 500 people to sign up using the link in the video description, you'll even get 2 months for free. There'll be more tutorial videos coming soon, so subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.